Hi everyone, this is Andy from CFC, Wisdom's Corner in Depth. Just wanted to reach out to you tonight for tonight's teaching. If you're looking for a good church home, come check us out on Sundays, 10 a.m. Come an hour early for coffee, or on Wednesdays, 7 p.m. Come an hour early for coffee. Also, I want to give a shout out to a new program that we're going to be having coming up this month. It's called Kingdom Couples. And it's good for your marriages, relationships, or even if you just want to, have a relationship in the future. It might be good for you guys to check that out. And the reason I bring that up is tonight's teaching is about relationships. So tonight's text, I'm going to take it from a very strange text. It's going to come from 2 Timothy chapter 3. So just bear with me as I read this to you. But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, and having a form of godliness but denying its power thereof. And from such people turn away. For of this sort are those who creep into households and make captives of gullible women, loaded down with sins, led away by various lust inclinations, always learning but never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. And so I'm going to stop there because you're probably wondering what in the world that would have to do with relationships. And by the way, any list in Scripture is never a completely comprehensive list. That's just what Paul mentioned. But if you look at the list here, this is not a person that most people would want to be around. In fact, it looks like the resume for a sociopath. But here, I think that there is some hidden nuggets of truth that can save people a lot of trouble with relationships. And a lot of people are going through troubled marriages, troubled relationships, and they're probably thinking, if I had just seen the red flags sooner. So I'm going to go through some of these red flags tonight and give you some weapons, some ammunition, so you're able to pick out the red flags. But don't just look for red flags in relationships. Also look for a green light. God will highlight what he wants for your life. So with that being said, I'm going to pull up my notes here because there is a lot here that we can talk about. So let me get to the first one. I can get to it. Let's see. Lovers of self. Okay. These men, by the way, in the Greek, the word that it uses for man is man. So it is a masculine human. Kind of interesting. A couple of verses later, it mentions women. Could this have been a warning system given by Paul so that women aren't carried away into abusive relationships? We're going to find out. Anyway, these men are selfish, literally in the Greek, self-lovers or lovers of their own self only. The proper love for oneself should only come from out of God's love, the agape, or in the proper sense of liking oneself, the philia love, the friendship love. Note that this is not the agape or unconditional love. This is more akin to just liking your own self only and looking out for your own self-interest. In the context of romantic relationships or even platonic relationships, because some people have platonic relationships with the opposite sex, these people are selfish and tend to defend only their own self-interest and preservation without courteousness, which is common to both thoughtfulness and consideration of others. They do not, and see, there's an extreme here. Well, a lot of these, you'll notice a spectrum. On the one hand, the person will love only themselves, not care about anybody's interest. And on the other extreme, you'll have a guy a man, for instance, that does not love himself at all. They have no love for themselves at all. But what is it that it says in Scripture? It says, love your neighbor as yourself. So it kind of gives the inclination that you're not able to fully love your neighbor if you don't love yourself. And you're not able to love yourself if you don't have God's love. So that's something just to look out for in relationships, marriages, whatever. Lovers of money. I could say a lot on this one. Again, there's a spectrum here. So these men love or like money, and they put it ahead of all things in hope of gaining all things through money. They will often use the pursuit of money in the pursuit of women, but little do they know that they are often chasing and not pursuing. Chasing is a lack of purpose. Pursuing has purpose and divine intention and faithfulness behind it. Their own relationships, if they have any at all, often suffer, and they only attract and group together with other like-minded people. The sin behind that is called avarice. It's just when you have this unquenchable desire for money. You believe it solves everything. Now, money does answer problems, don't get me wrong, but it's not the only answer to problems. Try running a marriage without money. Try running a church without money, and you'll get off the ground for a couple of days, and that's going to be the end of it. You have to have money. You have to have stewardship. You have to have principles in line. But also, the love of money on the opposite end of the spectrum is the lack of money. So there's got to be this healthy middle ground where we're staying true. So going further into that, the love of money will create all kinds of evil and bad things in a person's life. And their money problems will become your money problems. Sometimes the love of money can create a lack of money or even the fear of a lack of money. And see, these things will actually pop up later in the relationship if you don't catch them early. So a lot of people, they feel like they have a good relationship, but there's a constant strain on money. And there are different reasons for that. So there are things that you can do to engage the Lord to fix those problems. Sometimes there are generational curses at play. Sometimes there's a lack of good stewardship. Sometimes the person's life is under attack financially because the enemy knows that if he can attack the person's finances, he can attack the person's money, he can attack the person's relationships, their influence. So that being said, the third point in the list is the boasters. They just braggadocious. These men are boasters. They are vagrant, empty pretenders and impostors, and these men often try to appear to be way more than they truly are. They often come up with elaborate stories and lies in order to manipulate their way into relationships. Am I getting warm yet? Sounds kind of familiar with a lot of people. They have grand illusions and often try to appear to be way more than they truly are, or they have grand delusions and try to be what they actually are not at all. So these people actually just try to be something that they're not at all. It's a complete fabrication. In their mind, why be anything when they can just pretend to be something or to get what they think they want? They often try to come up with eloquent and elegant things, yet without pure motives and intentions. They are often very haughty, high-minded, but empty-minded, and as I mentioned before, these braggadocious people tend to be a little more on the sociopathic end. For those who are psychology students, try being in a relationship with a sociopath. It does not go over well. And so, it's from an ancient word meaning empty or wandering, because these vagabond boasters move from one naive person to the other. So it has the idea of floating from one individual to another, kind of like a locust flies from one field to another, and after it devours one field, it just goes to the next place and devours that, and the next place and devours that. So these people leave a track of destruction behind them. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Some of these notes. They use people also. They use their gift to take from others. They're not into serving others. They want to take from others through their gift. There is a spirit of entitlement behind their boastfulness. They didn't come to serve with their gift. They want to draw from you. Using their gift to be self-exalting and not bringing God's glory to situations, as well as not bearing and bringing glory back to God. And the fourth one on the list is arrogant. And I know what you're thinking. It probably sounds a lot like the last one, but there is a little bit of a difference, which I'll get to later. These men are arrogant and haughty. They appear to be higher than they really are, and they are unwilling to pay the price required to succeed in life or have any victory in life. They often have grand delusions or illusions of grandeur and use vice to either try to achieve them or make others think that they have actually achieved these goals, when in fact they have not at all done so. These people will often show off or flaunt. They often show off their relationships or their accomplishments or their achievements because typically there's a root of woundedness there or rejection. So they're trying to draw validation and legitimacy from other people, i.e. forming bad relationships. So that being said, they manifest a false sense of humility. Whereas the other one's kind of puffed up and empty, this person's kind of exalts themselves above other people. It literally means to raise oneself kind of above everyone else. They want to sit a little higher than everybody else. So it's all about position or title. Now, and this next one's kind of interesting because this is one of those Greek words that has two meanings. Some translations render this blasphemer, and that's certainly true. These men are blasphemous toward God, and do you not think that if they dishonor God and disrespect God, that they would not abuse and dishonor you? These men are often harsh, biting, verbally critical, and abusive in conduct and conversation alike. So there is a principle of lesser and greater. So if they're willing to do that to God on a higher level, they're willing to do that to you. And so the word blasphemer in Greek literally can also mean abusive. It has the connotation of an abusive tongue, to hurt or bludgeon somebody with your words. Words have spiritual weight and power behind them, and they can do damage to people, particularly over years where there's a traumatic process in relationships. And this can be abuse in all forms. So there could be sexual abuse in relationships, emotional, physical, and yes, I know what you're thinking, even spiritual abuse. There are men that will lord over their wives, for instance, trying to be the spiritual dictator of their home, not the spiritual leader. It's not about loving their wife, it's about control. And so there is an idea of being spiritually abusive or controlling, using God's word and perverting God's principles to have power over someone who is supposed to submit to you, but you are actually kind of putting them under your thumb. And so there are different types of abuse, and blasphemy literally kind of covers all of those, but it particularly has the connotation of being verbally abusive. This next one's kind of interesting because this is kind of a slippery slope. We live in a culture where people live with their parents a lot longer than they used to. A lot of times we're actually caring for parents, or there's a good relationship with the parents and there's a good friendship. So the next one is literally disobedient to parents. Now you have to be very careful with this because your parents don't always ask you to do the right thing. For instance, okay, what if God calls you to move out of state, but your parents command you to not move out? in that case, you have to choose between honoring your parents and obeying your parents. So sometimes we have to honor our parents, but not obey what they say. Especially when you are certain God is calling you to something, a ministry, a marriage, a move, a big move, a move that might take you far away. Oftentimes, a lot of instances, there are children or grandchildren involved in these instances. And there's a fear that if they move far away, they'll lose that relationship. And so we have to be very, very careful about releasing back to God what is God's when it's time to let it go. That's kind of how you know a good relationship, when you're willing to release that when you're supposed to, and when you're willing to take hold of something when you're supposed to. Letting our children grow up, knowing when to empty out the nest, knowing when to let them move out, make their own decisions. And the reverse is true as well. Having a relationship with your parents when you are older, when you no longer have to submit under their spiritual authority in terms of obedience, but you still have to honor them. So we have to honor the parents and hold them in high esteem, but we have to kind of temper that with, okay, is this being obedient to God? This will take a lot of forms in instances where the parents may not like the suitor that the person's bringing home. And sometimes there's wisdom in that, and you should hear your parents out, sit down and talk with your parents. Maybe they see something you don't. Sometimes you have to take it before the Lord and find out, okay, God, do I need to listen to my parents, or do I need to follow your heart on this? Anyway, moving right along. I want to move into the next one, where it talks about being ungrateful or unthankful. These men are both ungrateful and ungracious. They are unthankful and do not give praise to God or recognition to other people. That's a good thing to look for in a suitor or a spouse. Are they grateful to other people? How do they treat other people who do things for them? Do they reciprocate in kind? And do they have manners? Or are they kind of still and kind of distant? So those are things you need to take into consideration. If they are discourteous to other people, if they're not grateful, if they're not thankful, they're going to do the same thing to you eventually. It's a matter of time. So there's a lesser kind of greater than principle going on here, where we need to look for attributes in these people that show virtue. So the idea for being thankful actually has the same connotation as praise. So does your suitor or your spouse give praise to God? Do they give recognition to other people when other people help them? Or do they take credit? Do they reciprocate in kind and do things for you? Or is it an all give and no take relationship? So those are some things that you should take into consideration when choosing someone to marry. When you sacrifice and it is not reciprocated and appreciated, and there is not a mutual sense of self-sacrifice in the relationship. In other words, you should not be making all the sacrifices. There are instances where on some days you will carry your wife, you will carry 90% of the weight, she'll carry 10%. There are some instances where the partner will carry 10%, you'll carry 90%, and vice versa. And sometimes it's 50-50. Sometimes there's an ebb and there's a flow. But marriage is not about just carrying the one person. It's not about parenting. And that's a weakness that a lot of people have in relationships, is a lot of men marry a woman that they want to parent them. They want a mother. And they're not called to that. They're called to be a husband. They're not called to be mothered. And the same thing with the opposite of the spouse, because this can be reversed as well. So that being said, look out for these little insecurities and things. Now, I'm not saying that people aren't human and don't make mistakes. But if there are inconsistencies that are constantly apparent, you might want to take it before the Lord and ask Him, okay, where's this relationship going? Anyway, the number 8 is impious or unholy, and kind of self-explanatory here. Basically, how sanctified or how set apart are they for God? Because if they are not holy, it can defile your marriage. That being said, I don't want that to be a license for people going out and leaving their spouse. There is a passage in 1 Corinthians 7:14 that says, an unbelieving husband has been sanctified through the wife, and an unbelieving wife has been sanctified through the believing husband. So if there is no reason to leave the spouse, if there's no biblical grounds such as abuse, infidelity, or the Pauline exception where there is abandonment. Sometimes people abandon people. I've seen this happen a lot. They will just abandon the marriage. In that case, you're free. But if the people are willing to live together, as Paul talks about, then your sanctity will sanctify the mate. The wedding bed is holy. The marriage has been sanctified. You don't have to worry about the person's unbelief defiling you so much. God's grace is sufficient to help you sanctify that marriage. And He will give you the tools to love your spouse back into equality. So, I want to bring up point number 9. And I think this one is the one that translates natural. Let's check something out here. Unloving. Basically, some people render it unloving. But what this really means, it has the connotation of being one who lacks natural affection. This is something that you need to look out for quite a bit in your relationships. How do your children respond to this person? How does your family respond to this person? How do animals behave? Your pets. Yes, believe it or not, pets can be a good indication if there is some kind of unseen darkness inside that person that you need to be aware of. So if they lack natural affection toward animals, toward the elderly, toward your parents, toward their parents, toward their friends, if there is a lack of a natural sense of affection, that's something you might want to take into consideration. If they're mean to older people, for instance, or they don't respect elderly people, or they tend to be abusive to animals, you probably should not covenant with this person. I'm going to go ahead and just say you definitely should not covenant with this person. There is an unseen darkness there that needs to be worked out between that individual and God. And that abuse can kind of spew over into other areas. So, number 10, unforgiveness, unforgiving. Anybody that's been married or a relationship more than 3 months knows that you need to have forgiveness towards your spouse. You need to be able to both, and the weird thing is, in Greek, the word forgiveness means to release. It is the same word where they talk about releasing Barabbas, when they said, release him, crucify Jesus. Same word. It means to release, to let go, to dismiss, to pardon. So you have to be able, one, to release good things to your spouse and to release them from bad things. And if you can do those two things, you will walk in high levels of forgiveness toward your spouse. You'll be able to avoid arguments. You'll be able to avoid, I'm not saying you don't sit down and talk out disagreements, but if you have a nasty thought about your spouse or your partner, you take that before the Lord, bring that thought in subjection to Christ, have the Lord judge that thought, bring that before Him, work it out. You would be surprised how many nasty arguments and fights you could avoid. And if people could do that, the domestic violence in relationships would go down, because these things are spiritually caused and they're connected with deep, bitter, wounded roots within people. Now this next one, I really want to talk about this one. Some versions render it implacable. Literally in the ancient language, it means without covenant. Now, I got to speak to this a little bit, okay? If you are in a relationship with someone and they never express a desire to enter into a covenant with you, if they put it off and put it off and put it off, and they show no interest at all, that is a red flag you eventually need to take before the Lord. A lot of people will move in together before they're married, and I'm not judging anybody that's done that, so please don't get me wrong. A lot of people do that. They get married, and the Lord's gracious. He's very, very, very gracious. But there needs to be, at some point in a romantic relationship, the idea that you want to form a covenant with that person, that you love them and only them, and you want exclusivity. There needs to be an agreement that is arrived at. Okay, we are going to form a covenant. We are going to form a bond. You're going to be my life partner. We're going to work together in ministry, the household, whatever. These people also will tend to break or not keep promises, or they do not honor arrangements and agreements, and they frequently violate or will never make commitments at all. These are the people that you cannot get to commit to anything. They can't commit to a certain time of being there. They can't commit to being on time or being respectful of your time. They basically keep you as an option. You should be their only thing. You should not be an option. So this just goes out there for anybody in online land. Take these things before the Lord. Take them seriously, and ask God about the covenants, because that's really the ultimate goal of dating and marriage, is to arrive at that covenant and to find the life partner that God has for you and has called you to have. Number 11, slanderers. I don't even think I need to say a whole lot about this. Slander basically means to murder with the tongue. We need to be very careful of being around people who not only just gossip, but they actually maliciously murder people with their tongues. There is a spirit behind that, and it will spill over into your marriage. I think one of Satan's names is even slanderer. So slander is, like, for instance, in our society, you can be sued for slander. Slander is a big thing. Slander is basically to assassinate someone's character. So if you have a partner that's constantly slandering people, slandering their friends, slandering their other connections, be reticent to move ahead with them in a commitment. Now, God can help these people to work through these issues, and God is gracious. I'm not saying if the person has one of these traits that you just need to throw them away. But these are safeguards that the Lord has put in place because He cares about our relationships. He cares about us. So I'm going to speed this along a little bit. And I think I'm just going to do one more. And then I think we'll come back next week. I realized I had more than I thought I had. So anyway, we'll stop with that. We'll stop here this time. And I'll begin next time with the other points. But just keep these traits in mind and read through this passage. Ask the Lord what He's called you to. What marriage has He called you to? What relationship has He called you to? Save yourself a lot of hurt, a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. And if you're in a relationship that needs some work, come check out Kingdom Couples. We're going to teach you biblical principles here that will get you grounded and founded in biblical principles so that you can build a relationship that God can bring heaven to earth to. Because that's what we're called to do. We're called to walk in dominion with our relationships, with our family, with our homes. Everything is called to be in decency and in order. And we're going to give you the tools to do that. So if you're within driving distance, come check out Kingdom Couples. Check out our website. Come check us out. And I believe next month I'm going to pick up with point 11. and we'll work down to the other half of these traits because they get far more severe as the list goes on. So anyways, just out there to everyone, thank you for tuning in. And I just wanted to honor each and every one of you. God has a great covenant connection for you. He's got a great marriage waiting for you. And he's called you to defeat some giants. And he's called you to bring stability to your home and healing to your marriage. So that being said, thank each and every one of you for tuning in. And I wish you well. Thank you.